Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love.
Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm political scientist Michael Baranowski, an emeritus professor at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined by Professor of Law at Chase Law School, Ken Katkin.
Hey, Michael, it's great to be back.
Yes, great to be back, and we, of course, have a bunch of things to talk about. We can just jump right in. The first one has to do with, I think, an interesting circuit split on a fairly important issue, I'd say. On June 8th, federal judge Leo Sorokin struck down the Trump administration's $100,000 H-1B visa payment rule. Now, the rule that comes from a September 2025 proclamation of the president requiring many employers who want a new H-1B worker to come into the U.S. and work for them to pay $100,000 before the government would process or approve the petition. Now, Sorokin held that this was not a normal visa fee and not a penalty. It was essentially, in his view, a tax. And so under the Constitution, taxes require congressional authorization, which this did not have. He also held that the agencies implementing the rule violated the Administrative Procedure Act by imposing it without notice and comment and without a reasoned explanation or considering any alternatives. Now, last year, though, a separate federal judge in Washington, D.C. upheld the same fee, finding that it was within the president's broad immigration powers. So, Ken, what do you think? Did Judge Sorokin give it right here on the law?
I think he did. But, it's interesting. Both of the judges, Judge Howell, who decided the earlier case, and Judge Sorokin, they're both Obama appointees. So, I don't think the split can be put down to just partisan differences. But my view is that Sorokin is the one who had it right.
I mean, that sort of was my take, because it seemed to me that what the Trump administration was essentially doing was going around Congress by imposing a new restriction. I mean, what is it, in effect, the restriction on H-1B visas outside of congressional authorization through this fee, which, of course, far exceeds what's actually needed to process otherwise eligible applications. So my first take on this, and this really wasn't a primary thing in Judge Sorokin's opinion, is that it sounds like he's sort of trying to legislate a tighter H-1B requirement without Congress.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. So, Judge Howell, who had decided the earlier case, which came out the other way back in December, her reading of the statute was that the statute gives broad authority to the agency to set terms and conditions under which an alien can be lawfully present in the United States, and that the courts have generally interpreted that authority very broadly under what's sometimes called the plenary power doctrine. So when Howell looked at it, she said, well, if the broad authority to set terms and conditions under which an alien could be legally present in the United States include things like, that they can say, well, this alien can have a student visa and they can come here only as long as they're in a degree program and in good academic standing, and they have to leave if they graduate or flunk out, or they can give a tourist visa to people who come from countries that need a tourist visa and say, well, you can come here, but you can only stay so many days, and then you have to leave after a certain number of days. That those and you can't work while you're here, that those kinds of terms and conditions are all within Congress's plenary power to, delegate to the agency,
Right.
You can make
Right.
these rules. So she looked at that and said that she didn't see a difference in kind between like giving someone a visa on the condition that they not work or giving someone a visa on the condition that they pay $100,000. So I
Yeah.
think that's the way Howell looked at it, is that there's this broad authority to set terms and conditions. And so if it's a monetary condition, that's no different than a condition about what the person has to do while they're here or can't do while they're here. But I do think Sorokin has the better of that argument. I think what he says is that this seems to be revenue generating, and that revenue generation is what we normally would think of as taxation, and that the broad authority to set terms and conditions for what an alien who is allowed to come here can do while they're here doesn't include a power to set a monetary condition, because that's basically just levying a tax, and only Congress can levy taxes.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's because, as I read the statute, it does say, as you point out, the president can suspend entry or impose restrictions any restrictions, in fact, he deems appropriate
Yeah.
if their entry be detrimental to the interests of the United States. And his argument, Trump's argument, as I understand it, is basically that, well, this is in fact detrimental because tech firms have been abusing the H-1B visa to bring in lower-priced foreign tech workers and displace American workers, artificially suppress wages, that sort of thing. So that's not an unreasonable argument, but it seems to me that the question is, what does impose restrictions mean? And does that mean give the authority to essentially tax? Because this isn't a penalty, because nothing is done wrong. It's not a processing fee because it far exceeds the cost of processing. So it makes it a tax almost by default. And so it seems to me this is a case where even if the statute says that the president can do that, the Constitution says that Congress has to initiate taxes. And so therefore, the Constitution would trump that statute as I read it. I wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think that's exactly what Judge Sorokin said. So I think both Judge Howell and Judge Sorokin sort of start from the principle that Congress, by this statute, under the statute is the Immigration and Nationality Act, that Congress in the Immigration and Nationality Act has in fact delegated a great deal of discretion to the executive branch to set terms and conditions that an individual applicant would have to comply with if they want to be allowed to be lawfully present in the United States, and that's a very broad power. And then the only thing they really disagreed with each other about is, as broad as it is, does it include the power to impose large monetary fees? And they're I think they both kind of didn't really say that the language of the statute clarifies that. But I think Howell says, well, that doesn't seem to be an exception within the statute. It's just another kind of term and condition that can be imposed. Whereas Sorokin said, well, but it's because of the Constitution, not because of the statute, that the power to impose a tax is something that the Constitution gives only to Congress, and it's not delegable to the executive branch.
And it seems to me also that a recent Supreme Court precedent might break against the Trump administration here. I'm thinking of Learning Resources versus Trump, the IEEPA tariff case, where the court said that the Constitution, in part, rests the power to lay and collect taxes on Congress, and that's what the president was essentially doing. This tariff was a tax. I mean, they aren't exactly on point, but there's enough similarity here that makes me seem that Sorokin has a much better argument than Howell did on the law here, at least.
Yeah, no, I think that case came out after Howell's opinion came out. So yeah, but I think you're quite right that the tariffs case kind of reaffirms that the executive branch cannot levy taxes, that only Congress can levy taxes, and so that even when Congress gives the executive branch broad authority to impose terms and conditions on aliens who want to be lawfully present here, that can't include the authority to tax them, because Congress can't delegate that power away.
And just to step back a second for folks who might not be entirely aware, H-1B program was designed to allow U.S. employers to temporarily hire foreign workers in certain occupations that require specialized knowledge and at least a bachelor's degree of education. And there is a cap of $65,000. There's an extra $20,000 for individuals who have a U.S. master's degree or higher, and status is typically granted for up to 3 years. You can get an extension up to 6 years. And typically there are hundreds of thousands of applications for these effectively 85,000 slots. And Trump has a case, that this program is being abused in certain ways to bring in lower-priced foreign tech workers, and maybe that does have the effect of displacing some American workers, artificially suppressing wages, because even though there's that cap every year of 85,000, because of past year approvals, at any given time, there are somewhere around 600,000 active H-1B visa workers employed in the U.S. And in fact, most of them are at entry or lower level wage tiers, not at the very top. And so because it is tied to an employer, this visa, workers can't go elsewhere easily, and that really gives employers an awful lot of power over these employees to kind of further suppress wages, essentially. But even if you think Trump is right, I would argue that putting in a screening device, a monetary screening device, is simple but a bad screening device, because what it does effectively is it selects for employers with money, and it penalizes smaller companies, but it really doesn't get at the heart of how these H-1B visas are being abused. And so to me, the answer to this program is just Congress reworking the legislation behind it and not imposing this sort of fee, which I don't think the president can legally do.
Yeah, I mean, I think there probably was some truth to the, as you said, to the notion that Silicon Valley tech firms and other tech firms, if you've got someone who can do software coding from India and someone who can do software coding who's graduated from an American university, they can get the Indian employee cheaper, and also they can have more leverage over them because, if that person ends up leaving the job, they'd have to leave the country. So that does kind of create an unfair form of competition in the job market that may, work to the detriment of American people trying to enter that job market. Yeah. But I think in other kinds of markets, I think that's had a particularly harmful effect on academia. A lot of universities like to try to hire, the best people from around the world. And there's, a lot of subjects in academia that, maybe only a small handful of people are even studying. And, if you want to get someone who's really, top notch in it, you've got to look around the world. But very few universities were able to pay these fees. So, hiring of foreign PhDs pretty much ground to a halt, except at maybe the top 25 richest universities in the country. And I think that was to the great detriment of the country, really, that we couldn't get people like that. So certainly the university I work at, which you used to work at, Michael, had a total ban on foreign hiring once this $100,000 fee went into effect. And I don't think that was good for the university, or for the students, or for anybody, really. So that's I think that this has to be done carefully. I mean, the Trump administration, always, likes to use a meat cleaver instead of a scalpel. But I think if Congress was going to work on reform in this area, they should sort of be careful about what kind of occupations there's actual problems in, and what kind of occupations this kind of reform would be creating problems in where there wasn't problems before.
Yeah, because Congress could modify the program so it's not right now what they do when there are more entries or applications than there are slots, which is every year. They do a random lottery, which is administratively easy but substantively dumb.
Yeah.
I mean, they could replace it with some sort of a weighted system based on things like wage level, maybe with area cost of living adjustments, because honestly, it costs a lot less to live in Cincinnati than San Francisco, right? But there are a lot of things they could do that would work a lot better than this. But I got to say, just generally, my basic instinct is to oppose immigration restrictions, especially for skilled jobs, because I think one of our strengths is that many of the best and brightest people from around the world come here to work and to live, and that fuels innovation and growth in so many ways. And stopping that, I think, is just such a huge, huge mistake.
Yeah, that's why I was focusing on universities, because I thought that actually illustrates your point the best, out of anything, because in universities, the only reason they would hire someone foreign is because they're better. Right. I mean, in tech industries, they might do it because they're cheaper, or because they're easier to exploit. But, I think, generally we want the best people from the world coming here. It's what's actually kept us as a leader in most sectors of knowledge production that exist in the world. The U.S. has been the leader of. I mean, even the Manhattan Project, which won World War II for us. That was almost entirely, recent immigrants fleeing from Nazism, who built us the atomic bomb. It's a very good thing for this country for the best and the brightest from around the world to want to come here and to come here. So if we cut ourselves off from that, certainly that's not self-confidence. That's not a national form of self-confidence.
Yeah. So given that there's been a circuit split here, do you expect to see this move up eventually to the Supreme Court? What's your take on how this might play out?
No, I don't think it will. It's not actually a circuit split in the technical sense, because both of these judges are U.S. district judges. Right. They're not circuit judges.
Thank you for the clarification.
So it's. I don't think there will end up being a circuit split. I think after the tariffs case, if the Trump administration appeals Judge Sorokin's ruling, then that would have to be appealed, I guess, to the First Circuit. He's in Massachusetts, and the First Circuit would decide it. And I don't actually see how this would come up in another circuit. It's Judge Howell's decision was in the U.S. District Court in D.C., but it wasn't appealed. So I think that, there'll be a holding in the First Circuit. If depending who wins or loses it, it could go to the Supreme Court. But I don't know that the Supreme Court's going to want to take this one right away. I tend to think the First Circuit's going to affirm Sorokin, and that there's not going to be enough disagreement with that at the Supreme Court for them to want to take it.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about California. They had the primary a couple of weeks ago, but we still have counting going on, and President Trump has claimed fraud. He told journalist Kristen Welker on Meet the Press, "It's a rigged election. All I have to do is look." And then when Welker responded, "But that's not evidence," Trump said, "You're either crooked or you're stupid," and ended the interview prematurely. And, Trump and many others on the right say that the slow pace of the count and late Democratic surges for candidates are sort of prima facie evidence of fraud. And Democrats argue, well, California correctly prioritizes openness and accuracy over a swift count. Now, Ken, I'm fairly certain you don't believe California's electoral system is rigged against Republicans, but what about the claim that it shouldn't take this long to count all the votes? We hope you enjoyed this preview of our supporters-exclusive midweek show. If you'd like to hear the rest of the episode, we hope you'll consider becoming a supporter. Supporters get ad-free access to all of our shows, membership in our Politics Guys Discord group where you can join in on the conversation, and other benefits at different levels of support. To become a supporter, go to patreon.com/politicsguys. You can also support us through Venmo or @politicsguys or through PayPal. You'll find all of our support links in the show notes as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And if you'd like to get the midweek show, but you're not in a position to become a financial supporter, that's not a problem. Just send me an email at mike@politicsguys.com and I'll be happy to get that set up for you.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,